wonderfully wonderful science fiction theater of the imagination proudly presents Extreme Gravity, the new radio play written by J.D. Evans Jr., starring Elvis D. Tripp and his traveling troupe of strange voices, and featuring the musical stylings of Milford Whittle and his finger puppet marching band, which soothes by these silly announcements by Warhol the Potato. We continue with Chapter 21, Bokra and Suzanne Return to the Abandoned City. Suzanne shone the light pin on the trost, and with one step forward, she and Bokra were back in the abandoned city, deep below the stone castle on another world, where Frog the Munificent was continuing to teach his 5 newly enlightened novices how to surf time thread. The last time Bokra and Suzanne were in the abandoned city, they had gone to the bottom of the huge watch-shaped room, where they discovered a long tunnel which appeared to make it possible to traverse space-time and to visit other worlds. Now she and Bokra wanted to explore the tunnel to see if they could make sense of it.
Let's go this way. Maybe we can find something that provides a few more clues.
They who came before, those who followed, and we who always are, watch Bokra and Suzanne in anticipation of what they might discover and how much of it would, might, or will make sense to them. After walking for a few minutes, Bokra and Suzanne discovered a console that looked eerily similar to the 1964 Thunderbird they had taken for a ride in the fourth dimension space-time drive-in movie theater where they met Ugly Nogger. There were 2 chairs and the console faced the space-time tunnel. There was a big button on the console which was labeled Press Me, and before Bokra could say or do anything, Suzanne pressed the big button.
This looks interesting.
What happened next surprised nearly everyone. They who came before had forgotten about it, and those who followed were not aware of it because it had not happened yet, which left only we who always are to understand it. In fact, this console had the same set of controls as the 1960 Ford Thunderbird. It had the big lever, 2 small levers, and a nice set of buttons. The key difference was that instead of seeing a 4th dimension space-time drive-in movie theater screen with the 1964 Thunderbird being stationary, this console moved. And after doing some experimenting, what they discovered was that the console moved forward and backward along the space-time tunnel, although on a much smaller scale. It was like a ping-pong ball inside a relativistic cube that was able to move forward and backward. With more experimenting, Bokra and Suzanne discovered that since the console moved forward and backward, instead of seeing a wildly different collection of worlds, they actually were traveling within this same world, essentially going forward and backward through the history of this single world, which then led them to wonder if there were many space-time tunnels with one for each world, in which case there were many worlds and many space-time tunnels. This led Suzanne to ask 2 questions.
Why did the abandoned city have its own space-time tunnel? What is its ultimate purpose?
Around this time, as was not a completely unexpected and unsurprising occurrence, Ugly Nogly, in his beautiful black high-heeled slipper with a cute ankle strap and open toe, appeared and waved at Bokra and Suzanne. In a cosmic effort to avoid missing everything, Bokra and Suzanne and Ugly Nogly suddenly saw Frog the Munificent and his 5 novices standing with rather surprised looks on their faces in an elevator which had just opened. Then in yet another not completely unexpected move, Ilgon Ilgo appeared in his beautiful high-heeled slipper with a cute ankle strap and open toe and sent out a robot to try and break through his side of the space-time tunnel. Suzanne was surprised and wondered,
why is this happening again? Is Ilgun Ilgo going to be doing this all the time?
Ugly Noggly quickly handed everyone Latin percussion instruments and a snare drum, and held up a sign which said in a language they all understood, "Make a lot of noise," which is what they did. When something like this happens one time, it's a rather odd occurrence. But when it happens 2 times, it starts becoming a routine event, which at first makes little if any sense. It was a routine, but a routine for what purpose? For some unknown reason, had Bokra and Suzanne become helpers for Ugly Noggly, the keeper of the space-time tunnel, such that whenever Ugly Noggly needed help in its fight against Ilgun Ilgo, Bokra and Suzanne appeared? Soon thereafter, Frog the Munificent and his 5 novices appeared, and they all started playing Latin percussion instruments and making a lot of noise. There must be some purpose for this, and some need that it fulfilled. And as will be explained at some time in the future, apparently the only one who understood everything that was happening, except of course Ugly Noggly, was Ramunculus, the overlord of the 13th dimension. It was not just Bokra and Suzanne, Ugly Noggly, and Ramunculus, the overlord of the 13th dimension, who were involved, because Ramen the Pharaoh and the spaceship Chuck, Puddin', Little Guy, and Dumpling also were involved. Ugly Noggly had full motion in, along, between, and on all axes, while Bokra and Suzanne, traveling in the console, were focused mostly on moving forward and backward in the space-time tunnel, and the spaceships Chuck, Puddin', and their progeny, Little Guy and Dumpling, were more focused on moving in smaller, circular distances along the sides of the space-time tunnel. Observed from the perspective of Frog the Munificent, everyone was surfing time threads. Ugly Noggly, Bokra, Suzanne, and the console. Ramen, the Pharaoh, Ramunculus, the overlord of the 13th dimension, and the spaceship, Chuck, Puddin', and their progeny, Little Guy and Dumpling. It was a cacophony of time threads, all tending to coalesce in the same place relativistically. Ugly Noggly was handing everyone in the vicinity soda pop, popcorn, and candy, including good and plenty, while Ramunculus, the overlord of the 13th dimension, gave everyone a token good for 1 free replay, although it was not exactly clear what could be replayed. However, one thing was clear, and it was a slowly but steadily increasing sound, which indicated something was moving in the vicinity at a rather alarming rate, and that metaphorically it was like Bokra and Suzanne, Ugly Noggly, Ramen the Pharaoh, Ramunculus, the overlord of the 13th dimension, and the spaceships Chuck, Puddin', and their progeny, Little Guy and Dumpling, were bowling pins, and the rapidly approaching sound was a bowling ball. 2 questions then became quite obvious, the first of which Suzanne asked,
Who or what was bowling?
and the second of which was why were Ugly Noggly, Bokra and Suzanne, Ramen, the Pharaoh, Ramunculus, the overlord of the 13th dimension, and the spaceship Chuck, Puddin', and their progeny, Little Guy and Dumpling, bowling pins in this allegory? Remember that Melvin Pipple, not his real name, director of the Pretend FBI, Professor Dave Darkstone, and the interstellar Dalton Hunters, Why Not, and Asmal Delay were clandestinely surveilling the slammers who at this very moment had conquered yet another world and were setting up certain devices in the new control center of the conquered world for purposes of broadcasting to all the faithful the following words, blah, 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 blah. Did this indicate the boulder was the Grand Eye of Tole, and this was a quite unusual connected game with the goal primarily of increasing the standard galactic week by 1 day, thereby making it divisible equally by 3? As if in a dream, the Grand Eye of Tole stepped up to the giant ball of string and made the always consistent announcement, blah, 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 which in an odd way let everyone know that instead of being an unusual situation, this actually was what happened every Friday night at the local bowling alley of the Space Lane Bar and Grill. Was this a bowling tournament? And if it was, then against whom or what was the Grand Eye of Tole playing? Was the Grand Eye of Tole part of a bowling club that had its own colorful bowling shirt, shoes, and club moniker? If this was a metaphor, simile, or analogy, was it also an allegory? And if it was an allegory, then of what was it an allegory? On a different level, perhaps equally importantly, what did this have to do with Martha Quatagai, serendipity, and the servers, who as always were busily focused on creating more fabulous love potions? The fabulous love potion created by the servers had the comforting effect of shielding Martha Quatagai from what at this time was a completely elaborate and quite confusing set of thoughts and circumstances. Serendipity, as was the case at this time of year, was focused on making progeny. In an interview sometime later, retrospective journalist Shanana Lana asked Ugly Nugly whether any of this made sense, and if it did, then what was the point? As often was the case, Ugly Nugly said nothing, but handed her a box of good and plenty candy. They who came before, those who followed, and we who always are, were pleased and returned to doing what they did here, there, and everywhere. Thus ends the 21st chapter of Extreme Gravity. Bokra and Suzanne return to the abandoned city. Stay tuned for the next chapter, Darla Trivett's Dream. This has been brought to you by the fabulously fabulous, marvelously marvelous, wonderfully wonderful science fiction theater of the imagination. I'm Warble the Potato.